In the closing days of the Second World War, as Nazi Germany collapsed in flames and chaos, many of Adolf Hitler's most loyal officials met violent and desperate ends. Among them was Josef Terboven, the Reichkommisar of Norway, a man whose cruelty and arrogance had earned him the hatred of both Norwegians and Germans alike. His death on May 8, 1945, was both brutal and symbolic, an explosion so violent that it left little of his body intact. It marked the end of one of the most despised figures of the Nazi occupation in Scandinavia. Josef Antonius Heinrich Terboven was born on May 23, 1898 in Essen, in the industrial Ruhr region of Germany. The son of a small business owner, he grew up in a society shaped by the trauma of World War I and the political chaos that followed Germany's defeat. Terboven fought as a soldier in the Great War and was decorated with the Iron Cross, an experience that shaped his fierce nationalism and disdain for democracy. After the war, he studied law and political science at the University of Munich, but his ambitions soon turned political. In 1923, he joined the newly founded Nazi Party, years before it became a dominant force in German politics. By the late 1920s, Terboven had become a Gauleiter, a regional leader of Essen and the surrounding Ruhr district, one of Germany's most important industrial centres. He was known for his efficiency, fanatic loyalty to Hitler, and ruthless drive to enforce Nazi ideology. When the Nazis seized power in 1933, he rose quickly through the ranks. Hitler trusted him as a reliable enforcer, not a visionary, but a bureaucratic tyrant who executed orders without hesitation. In April 1940, Germany invaded Norway in Operation Weserübung, securing the country within 2 months. Norway was strategically vital. It offered control over the North Atlantic shipping routes, access to Swedish iron ore, and bases for attacking Britain. Hitler wanted Norway tightly controlled, and for that he needed a man both loyal and feared. On April 24, 1940, Josef Terboven was appointed Reichkommissar for the occupied Norwegian territories, effectively the Dictator of Norway under Nazi rule. Hitler gave him sweeping authority, greater even than that of Norway's nominal puppet leader, Vidkun Quisling. From his headquarters in Oslo, Terboven ruled with an iron fist. He suspended the Norwegian constitution, banned political parties, censored the press, and ordered mass arrests of anyone suspected of resistance. He surrounded himself with SS men and German police, often bypassing even Quisling's regime. He used terror as a primary tool of control. Thousands of Norwegians were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. Entire communities faced collective punishment. In 1942, after saboteurs attacked the German-run aluminium plant in Glomfjord, Terboven ordered severe reprisals. When resistance intensified in 1944, he declared martial law in several areas, ordering public executions of hostages and suspected partisans. One of his most infamous actions came in October 1942, when he ordered the destruction of the Norwegian fishing village of Tel Avia after resistance members killed 2 Gestapo agents there. The entire male population of the village was executed or sent to concentration camps, and the women and children were deported. The village itself was burned to the ground, a Norwegian Lidis. Terboven ruled through terror, propaganda and paranoia. He was nicknamed the Gauleiter of Terror, and even German officials stationed in Norway described him as fanatical, arrogant and increasingly unhinged. By early 1945, the tide of the war had long since turned. Hitler's empire was collapsing, and Terboven's control over Norway was weakening. The resistance movement, organised under the Milorg network, had grown bold. Allied forces were closing in from all sides, and Hitler's generals knew that surrender was only a matter of time. Terboven, however, refused to yield. Even as Berlin was bombed into ruins, he continued issuing orders from his lavish mansion outside Oslo, known as Skaugum, once the official residence of the Crown Prince Olaf and Crown Princess Martha. He had seized it for himself in 1940, and turned it into his own personal fortress, filling it with Nazi insignia and armed guards. When news reached him that Hitler had died on April 30th, 1945, Terboven reportedly reacted with fury and disbelief. Hitler's death was followed by the surrender of German forces across Europe, but in Norway, Terboven still commanded roughly 350,000 German troops under General Franz Boehmer. He refused to believe that the war was lost. On May 7th, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Allies. The next day, the Norwegian resistance and exile government in London declared the liberation of Norway. For the Norwegians, it was a day of jubilation, but for Josef Terboven, it was the end. In Oslo, German officers and SS leaders debated about what to do. General Boehmer, now effectively in command, wanted to surrender peacefully to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But Terboven, obsessed with loyalty to Hitler's order not to surrender, was enraged by what he saw as betrayal. Witnesses later reported that he stormed into meetings, shouting that surrender was treason and that Germany must fight to the last man. Yet even his closest subordinates ignored him. The war was over. Realising that he had lost all power and fearing capture, trial and execution, Terboven decided to take his own life. But true to his brutal personality, he chose not a pistol or poison, but a violent explosion. On the evening of May 8th, 1945, at his residence at Skaugum, near Oslo, Josef Terboven retreated into a bunker beneath the main house. According to multiple accounts, including Norwegian police and Allied intelligence reports, he took with him a large amount of dynamite, likely between 50 and 100 kilograms. He sat on a stool in the centre of the bunker, placed the explosives around him, and then detonated them. The explosion was so violent that it destroyed much of the bunker's interior and tore Terboven's body to pieces. Eyewitnesses described the aftermath as gruesome. His remains were scattered all across the room, and identification was made only from fragments of clothing and personal effects. His death was deliberate and theatrical, a final act of defiance and self-destruction, echoing the fanaticism that had defined his rule. Norwegian police arrived soon after, along with German officers who had surrendered. There was nothing left to do. The Reichkommisar of Norway was dead, obliterated by his own hands. With Terboven dead, the Nazi occupation of Norway officially ended. The German garrison, now under Boehmer's control, surrendered peacefully to the Allied and Norwegian forces, without further bloodshed. King Haakon VII and Crown Prince Olaf returned from exile to a liberated homeland after 5 years of brutal occupation. Terboven's remains were collected and buried anonymously, though some reports suggest that fragments were interred near to the site of his death. His death became a symbol of the self-destructive madness that consumed the Nazi leadership in their final days. Norwegian survivors viewed it as not a tragedy but as justice. The man who had ruled over their country through fear had destroyed himself in the most violent way imaginable. As one Norwegian newspaper wrote shortly after liberation, he lived in terror and died in terror. Josef Terboven's reign left deep scars on Norway. During his 5 years as Reichskommissar, over 40,000 Norwegians were imprisoned for political reasons, and thousands were sent to concentration camps in Germany. Hundreds were executed, entire villages were destroyed, families were torn apart. Unlike Vidkun Quisling, whose execution in October 1945 symbolised Norwegian collaboration, Terboven never faced trial or justice. His explosive death denied the world the chance to hear his account for his crimes. Even amongst Nazi officials, Terboven's end was seen as the culmination of his fanaticism. German officers in Norway had long considered him unstable. One historian described him as a man who mistook cruelty for strength and tyranny for order. In the end, Josef Terboven died as he had lived, violently, arrogantly, and without remorse. Sitting on a pile of dynamite beneath a mansion he had stolen from Norway's royal family, he blew himself to pieces rather than face the consequence of his rule. His death on May 8, 1945, was not an act of courage but of cowardice, a desperate attempt to escape justice. The explosion that tore his body apart also marked the symbolic destruction of the Nazi occupation in Norway. As the smoke cleared over Skaugum, the country was free at last, and the man who had terrorised it for 5 years was gone, leaving behind only ruins, pain, and a reminder of how absolute power can destroy not just nations, but those who wield it. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.